This is the 11th video in a series showing how to set up, configure, test, and debug the MVS Toolkit. In this video, we'll do a shallow dive into the Toolkit client and server logs and how to detect and remedy some common errors and exceptions. First off, let's look at the form of the Java exception, which you will see in the logs. Notice that there's a delimited form. Everything before the exception itself tells you where it came from, and the last delimited element is the exception itself. The images on the slide hopefully show what I'm talking about. Pool exception and connection pool exception. Two very similar exceptions that relate to a problem with D3's connection pool usage. There are several places to look at what may be causing these. First, review the D3 and Toolkit server errors. This would include list errors and the mvsp.log file in the mvsp account. Next, do listu, where a, and max users before and after stopping the Toolkit server. See if the connection pool usage in max users changed or any Toolkit user pibs disappeared from listu when you stopped the Toolkit server. You can also use the IDE to edit a web service resource and click the Advanced button to see how the pool is defined. Check a few of them to make sure that they're all the same. Also, check to make sure there are not multiple definitions of the same D3 server from a failed import. This can cause redundant use of the connection pool licenses. If all else fails, run the Toolkit server in foreground and see if anything pops. MV exception. Like the previous exceptions, this relates to a problem getting stuff out of D3. Look in the same places: list errors, list runtime errors, and the MVSP log file. List U, where A, and max users. Add to that where D to see if there are any MVS related pibs in the debugger. You can also use the IDE to edit a web service resource and make sure the subroutine arguments haven't changed. Then run the Toolkit server in foreground as your last resort. TL exception. This means there's a problem with the Toolkit server. To figure out what, review all the logs other than the one in which you found this exception to see if anything sheds any light on the problem. Edit the web services and resources in the IDE to see if anything looks impaired. Run the Toolkit server in foreground. There's a good chance the Toolkit database is corrupt, and it would be a good idea to rebuild it with the MDS script and a web service import. HTTP errors are another source of information not contained in the Toolkit logs, but rather are returned when making a request, either in a browser while testing or in the object returned to the application making the request. The most common is HTTP 404 error, resource not found. This means that a request was made to the Toolkit server for a particular web service resource, but that resource does not exist. The best thing to do is look at the URI, identify the web service and web service resource, then go to the Toolkit IDE and make sure that both the service and resource exist. Maybe somebody changed something and forgot to tell people using it. Maybe a failed export import. Could be several reasons. But whatever the reason, the user will need to either correct the resource in the IDE or have the requesting party correct their URI. HTTP 500 error, which is described as an internal server error. The 500 error is a catch-all error for circumstances where the Toolkit server could not get what it wants from D3. The slide shows 3 examples. Socket connection error, process execution failed, program not cataloged, and process execution failed, program not flashed. The socket error happens when the Toolkit server cannot connect to D3. The best thing to do is to go make sure D3 is running and that MVSP is listening. The other 2 happen when the connection to D3 can be made, but there is something preventing a successful execution. In these 2 examples, there's actually content after the process execution failed message. These 2 examples are pretty specific and it should be pretty easy to rectify. If it complains that the program is not cataloged, go catalog it. If the complaint is not flashed, go flash it. Of course, there could be deeper reasons for either of these or anything else that could be included in the exception, but at least you get steered in the right direction, and your already awesome D3 debugging skills should take you quickly to the problem and solution. In the next video, we'll talk about how to activate an older MVS Toolkit version, specifically 2.2.2 and earlier. If you have any questions about any of the content we've covered so far, please contact Rocket D3 Support.